A general understanding of a master soul is a soul that has been tasked with the awakening of the self, um, and through which it achieves the awakening of the other, right? And if you have experienced symptoms of these sorts of awakenings, you will have understood that this is a very dark ordeal. There's nothing, we call it awakening, we call it enlightenment or whatever, but there's nothing, rainbows and flowers about the process. It's a deeply, deeply stressful and difficult and often very painful process that's followed by grief, isolation, extended periods of isolation, incredible childhood trauma, just incredible, like these traumatic events that are sort of like put in your way to jumpstart your, well, the agency of your thoughts, right? Um, and this sort of like feels undeserved from like a basic 3D perspective, right? It almost like it makes a victim out of you, right? And it feels undeserved largely because, well, you're unaware of why it's happening. You're just unaware of why it is occurring. And from early on, and I can share my experiences with you guys, as soon as you start sensing that there's something unique or like a little bit different in how you think about things, how you ponder, how you see the world, how you see what's wrong with the world, how you interface with the larger world with your through your senses, when you can sense a little bit more, feel a little bit more. When I was younger, for example, I could walk into a room and almost like feel the anger in the room. If someone had fought or had some sort of heated discussion in the room, even like an hour before, I could go in and I could like almost sense it. I would get I would get tense in that room. And when I looked around, this is me being a child, for example, right? I would be like why is everyone else, like, is everyone else not feeling this way? And I thought everyone else also felt that way. They were just hiding it, like they were just better at hiding it and pretending like we weren't uncomfortable, right? Only years after that, I understood that people had absolutely no experience like I did when I walked into a room. Like for them, they were genuinely just in some random room that meant absolutely nothing to them, right? But for me, it was like this source of information, like in terms of like energy, sensory, everything, right? Um, so I've always been highly sensitive, but the problem is when you're that way, and let's say you're young and developing as a consciousness in both in your physical body, it's difficult to understand the concept that different people, although we share the same reality space, experience reality very differently. Right? You and me and everyone else likes to think that we interface with reality um, with the same quality and quantity of things and occurrences that happen around us, right? But that's just objectively not true. Some people are able to perceive more, while others are able to perceive less, and this is by design. If you look at some of the newer studies, let's say when it comes to brain function and consciousness, you will discover a very intriguing and very interesting fact that basically says that the mind, the brain, right? And this is objective scientific. This is empirical science, by the way. There's no juju voodoo shit with this yet. We'll get to that. But you'll understand that what the brain does is it doesn't just interpret the world, right? It doesn't just give you the sensory sensations that you require to interpret the three-dimensional world, but it also holds back and filters out a very large proponent of the things that it sees, right? So let's say if the brain is capable of feeling like radio waves or whatever. I'll give you a great example, okay? If your brain wasn't cutting out the noise of your bones moving, which is an actual noise, by the way, that you can hear because you're within your body, you would be hearing the, the noise of your bones moving at all times, right? But what the brain does, again, empirically proving scientific fact, what the brain does is it shuts off the sound of your bones and your muscles like contracting and releasing, so you don't have to hear that shit all the time, right? So again, not only is the brain an interpreter of the three-dimensional realm, but it is also a sort of filtration system that gradually unlocks its full capabilities in order to protect us from what? From sensory overload. I'll tell you why. Even from an evolutionary sense, let's say for survivability in the material realm, so let's say you gain a body and now you have to survive in this brutal primal jungle where there's predators everywhere. Is it evolutionary, like evolutionarily, is it a benefit for you to hear your own body moving or not? It's a major detractor, right? It's not a benefit at all. It's actually something that might get you killed. So the brain shuts it off. I'll tell you another example. When you listen to music, right? Why are there different qualities of music? So, right, let's say you listen to an MP3 file, right? There's kilobytes per second. So what are these kilobytes per second, right? It is the amount of kilobytes that are conveyed to our brains through our hearing so that it can interpret it as sound. Again, scientific fact, empirically proven. Um, what you don't know, is that most of the music you listen to, unless it is of the clearest quality, which is the FLAC for in FLAC format, most of the notes you hear in the music that you listen to are actually filled in by your brain. So when you listen to the song, if you could objectively listen to it without your brain's interpretation or interference, the song would sound absolutely not the same as it is when your brain is interpreting it. So how song format and how the song size on your computer can be brought down to a manageable few megabytes, right? Where their true file size is incredibly large, like much larger, probably like 20 or 30 times larger, is because, well, these very, smart people who knew how the brain worked or functioned understood that if they cut out pieces of the music, right, your brain would actually fill those parts in. So most of the music you listen to, again, right, is actually mostly interpreted by your brain, which is a crazy fact as well. So why are we talking about the functionality of the brain here? Because you have to understand that a lot of the things that the brain filters is according to a mind's or the consciousness that inhabits that mind, their capacity to, well, to honestly just grasp and take whatever sensory information is going around, right, their external space, without it affecting their sanity levels, right, and mental health. So the brain will defend your sanity because its prime directive is to do just that. When you have a traumatic experience, what does your brain do? It fragments that experience from the rest of your memory, right? So it almost like buries it down in the deep subconscious. It almost makes you forget. Like over drinking alcohol, for example, manually triggers this effect, which is really bad. But we'll get to that later. But yeah, even forgetfulness is a evolutionary defense mechanism for the brain. So the brain is like, this experience is too stressful. Our sanity might suffer for it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to completely erase this experience from my mind. I'm going to fragment it and put it into the subconscious. This is why regressive hypnosis therapy is very effective, by the way, because what it does, it releases it back onto the surface, these types of dormant memories. So what it's going to do, your brain is going to take this memory, it's going to hide it away somewhere until you've become more advanced, stronger, more capable of handling it, and then slowly, very slowly, it will start feeding you bits and pieces of this information through dreams, through visions, through some sort of triggers or trauma, like physical trauma, urging you to reintroduce yourself in a healthy manner to these issues. If it sees that you're reacting traumatically, it'll take it back down into the subconscious, right? So the brain is smart like that. It's very smart like that. And you could even say that it, and you don't hold agency um, as much as you think you do, right? Your brain is almost like the driver, and it decides what it needs, sort of like to survive. Um, Now, some people, let's say what we call higher consciousness, or people who have gained an advanced level of clarity, what they will experience is that they will feel like parts of these filtration systems almost like, coming off. And when that happens, your consciousness shines a little bit brighter. And I'll tell you guys what I mean by this exactly, right? So, from a four-dimensional perspective, if you look at, well, the timelines of our lives, you can look at um, fully aware consciousness as pure light energy, right? So, from a four-dimensional perspective, how our linear stream of time, how our linear lives would look like, it would look like a small dot passing through an event horizon. And this event horizon is everything that has happened and will happen in your life, pre-recorded and sort of like predetermined. And this little dot that represents where your consciousness currently resides. So what point of your life it is currently inhabiting, let's say right now, this very moment, your level of high consciousness or your level of agency and awareness increases its, let's call it a glow, right? So again, the more agency you have, the higher it glows. This is why religious teachers, religious texts, concepts, so on and so forth, they talk about the present moment, right? And how important the present moment is, and being aware in the present moment, and so on and so forth, because it increases your ability to transcend the current position in which your three-dimensional body and mind reside. And I'll tell you what that means, right? When you shine bright like this, you almost open a portal of possibilities. And how that portal of possibilities occurs in this four-dimensional space, right? If we were a four-dimensional observer looking down into your life right now, how it occurs is that the more awareness you bring, a portal opens and a new pathway unlocks to new possibilities, where now you, because you're a conscious creator, you can imprint new ideas and possibilities, right, onto your life from the perspective of your current state, right? This is some high level shit. But let's stop here with this and go back to how this relates to hidden enemies and trickster spirits and so on and so forth. So the things that inhabit the four-dimensional space, because the four-dimensional space is a transitional realm. Get it? So the four-dimensional space is what holds the three-dimensional space within itself. So it's almost like a prison. Okay, I don't want to go too far with this, but it's almost like a holding mechanism, and it connects the higher realms, right, to the pseudo lower realms. So our realm is connected to the 2D realm, in which in a way where from a three-dimensional perspective, you can look at the two-dimensional perspective and see it as incredibly basic, right? It's like playing, a video game that's two-dimensional, where everything is predictable and where you can see the full context of the game. Where a character, if you lived in a two-dimensional space as the character in the video game, you would see that game um, only in a streamlined manner, right? So you can't see the full context of where everything is. So let's say if you were a two-dimensional dot in the middle of a room in a two-dimensional game, and there's four walls around you, you will not be able to perceive the things that are beyond those four walls, right? But if you were a three-dimensional being staring at a two-dimensional space like that, you would be able to see everything that's beyond those four walls, right? So imagine the principle remaining the same between the four-dimensional perspective and three-dimensional perspective. What you and I cannot see in time or time space or reality, the four-dimensional perspective sees everything. It sees all the possibilities. It sees where you're going, where you're coming from, so on and so forth. Master souls, souls who have a higher imprint, or a high degree of intellectual or logic-based discernment, right? And generally souls who can connect to other souls in the beyond realm. So I'm talking about when I say souls that are very smart naturally and highly intellectual, who can decipher these things through logic and not intuition, who can decipher these things through sheer intellect, meaning seven life paths, or souls that are very close to the precipice or the final rhythm of their incarnations here, who have the innate ability to channel and contact spirits from the realms beyond. I mean, the nine life paths, and the master souls, obviously, um, 11 on a one-to-one basis, 22 on a meso basis, and 33 on a macro basis. But these souls gain almost like an enhanced, or I should say reduced, filtration system through the brain. So they view the three-dimensional realm from an enhanced standpoint where their senses and their intuitive senses are more alive, so to speak, right? And as soon as this happens, and you gain sort of like a sort of agency from, well, the four-dimensional rule set, right? What it does is that the program naturally, for whatever reason, let's call it a classroom, right? It's a classroom experience. The program wants to bring you down to your default state. This is why, people, when they say, "Oh, it's the Matrix coming after me," or "It's the Matrix attacking me," yada yada, this is what they mean. And how this manifests in like the simplest ways, at least how I've experienced it, and a few of my family members and close ones have experienced it, is um, you know uh, when you're the only one observing or sort of like interfacing and interacting with the world, you'll get these really low chance um, um, misfortunes. It's almost like the Matrix, or whatever you want to call it. It is sort of like interfacing back with you, and it's making itself known through this sheer ridiculousness of certain things going awry. So let's say you get on a computer and you have a really, really important email to send, and the computer just stops working, right? Or you'll just you'll get a new laptop or a new computer or whatever, and all of the parts are brand new, and someone else turns it on and it works great, and then 2 or 3 days later you turn it on when you're alone and it just doesn't work, right? Just bouts of misfortune, just electrical stuff just failing around you, taking a bus alone that just ends up breaking down, just stuff like that, stuff that other people are not there to experience or witness, right? And these things happen behind the scenes in a sense of like, um, almost like the world at large, or whatever mechanism is that is keeping our world in its default state, right? So that nothing goes awry. It, for some reason, requires it to be as predeterministic as possible. So what it actually does is it tries to default you back to that emotional or conscious state of suffering and shame and guilt and so on. So it's quite a malefic force, if I may say so. And how this relates to, let's talk about trickster spirits and so on and so forth, is that all of these things are usually aligned when your degree of consciousness and your level of optimism and enthusiasm goes down. So as soon as as soon as there's an opportunity for you to sort of like fall back into a lower state of being, it's going to, you know, hammer in that final nail for you, right? So let's say you're a little bit away from just, I don't know, exploding in a bout of, emotional anger or some sort of traumatic experience that happened to you. You lost a lot of money, and then something in your house is going to break down, and that's going to cost you even more money, right? Um, or let's say the chances, like it's hard to come up with specific examples, but the how you know that this is happening is that the chances of it occurring are so ridiculously slim that most younger souls, very much like myself, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, would say or would come to the conclusion that I am either wholly delusional or I am somehow cursed, right? And this cursed theme is what every high level consciousness, every person that's on the path to enlightenment has experienced from my experience. Everyone, like unequivocally, everyone I talk to has had these things occur to them at one point of time or another. And these are people who are truly, truly trying to transcend, right? The deterministic flow of their fate or destiny. Um, Things will happen. Let's say, I don't know, you find out that your loved one had a miscarriage, and it's a very traumatic event, right? And then it almost like rubs it in your face where everywhere you go, people are talking about, abortions. People are talking. It's almost like this overflow of negative energy. So whenever you're open and vulnerable to these energies, when you're not present in the present moment, let's say, when you have um if you look at your consciousness as like this bubble, right? And this bubble increases as you grow in consciousness, right? So as you grow in awareness and power, it the volume, so the quantity of this bubble just increases. But then when you fall back down into a desperate state, and you re-divert yourself from the present moment to thinking about the past or some traumatic event, or something that grieves you or angers you or shames you, a large proponent of this bubble in which your consciousness would be contained becomes emptied, right? It becomes very emptied, and this emptiness allows other things to sort of like seep into it slowly, right? Like through your aura or your damaged aura or something like that. And this is where these trickster spirits, they play their game, right? And how are they attracted to it? Well, because they're attracted to it, or I should say they were detracted to it from the glimmer or the light, if you remember that we talked about that, that was represented in the four-dimensional space is your consciousness and awareness. And when they see this light dimming, right, they're more attracted to it. This light keeps them away otherwise, right? Because it's full. The the bigger the light, the fuller the consciousness. But now when they see this open vessel, right, they can peer into it because again, you're making a portal. This is why it's almost like a double-edged blade, and you have to be very careful when you do shadow work, when you're truly looking for spiritual advancement. You have to be ready for what comes. And this is also why, let's say in spiritual circles, we say don't judge anyone, right? You might think it's sort of like easy what they're going through, but for them, it's probably incredibly, incredibly difficult because they have these things happening to them that are beyond the possibility, um, beyond the metrics of logic, right? And these attacks happen more frequently the more the more your consciousness grows, and they happen in different forms. So, for example, I posted once a while back, and I felt like a lot of people resonated with that notion that whenever everything's going right for you in life, so whenever you know you're on the right path, everything feels great, your health is good, you feel like you're succeeding, so on and so forth, um, the devil will make itself known to you. right? To me, and for me, like I said before, this is always in the form of what I call hag ladies, right? Some old lady um, um, who sort of like represents this force, right? And this force, like we said, it's a hidden force until it's not, until it makes itself known. So when we say you have direct enemies, well, these are the people who manifest as your direct enemies. And I'm not saying the person themselves, like let's say uh, a not so sweet old lady is your enemy. No, no, no. What I'm saying is that that person is in a state of consciousness. Let's say they're full NPC consciousness. They're unaware, or they're in grief or in deep trauma. They become the best possible vessel, right, for this sort of spirit to inhabit, right? At least partially. So when you attract, sort of like these hag ladies or whatever, at least how I did, when I'm at the zenith of my life, when I'm at the peak of my life, and there have been few moments in my life like that, thank God, at least, there's always this old lady who's incredibly rude, right? She'll pop up, she'll tell me something almost deluded or insane. She'll cause a stir. She'll cause a problem. She'll say something, very mean. She'll curse at me or something like that. And I know from the accounts of, let's say, friends and so on and so forth who are deep into spiritual practice who have also had these same experiences, right? So when you're shining bright, the devil will make itself known to you through, well, direct engagement, right? This is a sign that you're winning, but let's say when does the devil come to Jesus Christ, right? When he's at his weakest, right? Always. Um, and when he's at his strongest. So those are the two moments, right, where they show up. So some lesser evils, let's say lower level or lower degrees of trickster spirits, they will show up in the form of, it's almost like they're sending you a smile, right? Like you'll receive the bad news after the other bad news happened, right? It's almost like a cherry on top, right? And the chances of that occurring are incredible. Like, for example, it could be something so plain that will make you feel very unlucky and make you feel like the world is an unfair or unjust place. So let's say you go to a lecture and you today is the day where you haven't prepared your homework. It's just like one day out of 100, right? And that's the day you get asked for your homework. So let's say, okay, crap, I'm ashamed. I don't have my homework. I got a bad score, right? And you're in a bad mood. You go to another lecture after that. Again, you don't have homework on that day. There's 160 more students attending the lecture. You're the one who gets asked for your homework again, right? And then when you put this, so the way this is designed, I'll try to explain to you guys. This is done so by these trickster spirits on purpose, because the way this is designed is that what they want you to do is they want you to sit down and count the mathematical percentage, like what is the possibility, the actual math behind this happening, right? So happening once, so let's say there's 160 students, right? You get asked for your stuff. That's 1 in 160 chance, right, for that to happen. The chance for that to happen on a day out of 100 where you didn't have your homework ready, that's 1 out of, let's say, uh, 100 to 1. And then the chances of that happening twice on the same day, that now reaches almost cynical or cosmic levels of probability. And this is how you know, right? The repeated offense, the repeated pattern of salt in the wound behavior by the external world, right? And this is the sort of like the continuation of this torment is what makes you feel like, oh, I'm having an unlucky day. Am I cursed? What is this? Why am I so unlucky? Is just trying to spiral you down back into a state of considering the past, expecting negativity from the future, right? And it's a very, very, very truly, you know, almost like an evil thing. And it's also a lesson, of course, and something that you have to learn from, and you have to understand that at the ultimate end of your spiritual journey, you can't allow these forces to just play these tricks on you and sort of like get away with it, right? So you get better, you get a little bit better at understanding. Aha, I know what you're doing, right? Call it the matrix or whatever you want. I know what you're doing. I know you're trying to upset me. I know you're trying to put me off my game. So I'm going to go and, try to balance myself and almost like harmonize myself with with a better state of being at that moment. But of course, this is, you know, easy to say, but difficult to do. And the more you grow in consciousness, the more it happens, and the more hardcore it happens. And sometimes it happens all the time, right? All the time. So when we say master souls have hidden enemies, well, this is what they have to contend with. It's not just, I always say that try not to judge anyone else. Not because it's a bad thing to do, but you genuinely, truly, objectively do not understand what they're experiencing in comparison to what you're experiencing, right? For someone, a bus ride home, right, could be a bus ride home. For someone else, it could be a traumatic experience, right? And you have to understand that most people contend with stuff like having to pay their bills, right? Like, well, I have this much to pay. Like, oh, I have to make X amount of money per month. They're interfacing with the three-dimensional world through the lens and through the rule set of the default state, of the default matrix, right? Where advanced consciousness is interfacing with the three-dimensional world, but also with the world that we cannot see, the world beyond the three-dimensional world, as it makes itself known to them, and it's affecting their day-to-day living, right? So they used to always tell me about black monks and so on and so forth, these people, who attempted to be highly spiritual, and some of them were very despicable characters, very, very despicable, questionable, like morally questionable characters. And I never understood this when I was younger. I had a very big rebellious phase with these, like, how are these people close to God if there's this strange temptation around them, and there's this darkness around them, and only now, after basically like decades, I'm beginning to fully understand what that meant, because the forces these people have to contend with, they're friggin' brutal. They're not like what you and I had to contend with, right? When we were low state of consciousness. But um they're mystical forces that act upon the three-dimensional and that act upon your weakest points, right? And that is the true depth of the teaching of do not judge the other, right? Cast no judgment. Not because it's bad to cast the judgment, but because you are quite literally not even equipped with the senses, with this full sensory understanding to even cast the judgment at all, right? um you literally just can't even, you don't even understand. So let's say when you see someone in a state of disrepair, or you see someone who's highly dysfunctional, you see someone who is in grief or in misfortune and so on and so forth, you don't know what they have to contend with. If you put yourself in your current consciousness state in their shoes, you might just go insane, right? The moment I understood this, I understood that you can't take human law, let's say, and judge humans or souls equally before that human law. It is quite literally spiritually immoral, and I also believe it's inhumane, right? Because they're contending, they're interfacing with two completely different worlds. Now this, let's say, trickster spirits or so on and so forth, even if you look at mythology, there's an incredible amount, of course, like this is hidden knowledge, but there's an incredible amount, like a rich amount of of information and reading material that talk about these different types of spirits. And remember, werewolves and vampires might not exist in a traditional or classical sense of existence, right? Trickster spirits might not exist, but they're called spirits because they are able to interface with three-dimensional bodies and exist within the host bodies and the host vessels, in this case, human beings, right? And they can also inhabit different animals. They can inhabit different bugs, right? Let's say you have an incredibly um, important meeting tomorrow, okay? And let's say you're a life path 33, right? And a funny thing that's going to happen is you're going to plan your evening, you're going to lay down, and you're like, well, incredible important day tomorrow. Let me, do everything the right way. I'm going to lay down and fall asleep. And what's going to happen, there's going to be this one fly in your room, and it's going to buzz around your ear, and it's going to bite you all over, and you're just not going to be able to find it. You're just not, it literally won't let you sleep. And then you'll go to another room, right? And you'll itch all over, and you won't be able to sleep well, right? And then 3 or 4 or 5 hours later, you'll be able, to fall asleep, and then you'll have to wake up again in 2 hours. And um, a lot of people will say, "Oh, it's just bad luck. Oh, it's just misfortune," so on and so forth. But all of these beings are messengers of higher elemental powers, of elemental beings. There is no such thing as misfortune, right? So right now, what you're being tested for, let's say you've just gone through that scenario I just told you, you're being tested for your resolve. You're having to feel the tiredness, the moodiness that comes with the lacking of sleep, the lack of inspiration, the lack of motoric function, right? Like um, you have to go through life with these things running in the background at all times. Um, and let's say they don't have to be hag ladies each and every time. I know people who have completely different experiences, and their version manifests very differently, right? It could be like a violent old man or a drunk. Like drunkards are very easily possessed by these spirits. And if someone wants to ruin your day, you're gonna walk into a drunk guy, right? So there are states of being or altered states of mind that are very vulnerable to this sort of possession. And then there is your glimmer of consciousness that sometimes will attract these things to put you off your game. And this is a real thing. If you told this to your neighbor lady, they're gonna, oh, you're just making things up, and you're paranoid, and you think the world is acting against you. When in truth, by any objective metric, this is a provable offense, right? But the problem is, it's never going to happen. It's never, ever going to happen when other people are there to witness it. That's one of the laws of this thing. It's almost like a hidden rule, right? You ever had a thing where um I don't know, like you wanted to launch a program or launch your laptop, turn on your laptop, and you press the button, it doesn't work. It literally refuses to work, right? And then someone else walks into the room and they press the button and it works. And they're like, see, it works, right? You probably did something wrong. Just quantify that to daily trivialities, quantify that to the rest of your life, quantify that, and then just, increase its volume, by a figure of 10. And that'll sort of give you an idea of what kind of forces, master souls have to contend with. So let's say a lot of people don't understand why a lot of 33s tend to be douchebags and assholes, and why they have these like really moody moments, and sometimes they hate the world and they hate this and hate that, right? You're supposed to be spiritually advanced, you're supposed to be the highest level attainable. Well, that's why. And a lot of these 33s, especially 33s, end up being complete losers or morons, right? They end up being, this sort of like, you view them and you're like, you're a degenerate, right? You're not even morally upright. Right? And this is why, because they have to contend with this degree of, I don't want to say deception, but sort of like almost like a malefic influence, right? And then let's go through all of the numerology life path numbers, right? A lot of sevens have to deal with this, like we said, because sevens are very intellectually apt. And they're, if you look at the number seven, it looks like the Reaper's scythe, right? So their discernment, their ability, and the degree to which they can use their intellectual discernment is so intensely high that even though they're not usually at the consciousness level or the spiritual advancement level as the other life paths, they're so intellectually apt that they can discern these truths through right, the application of logic and math when it comes to these happenings in their life. So they'll actually figure it out. That they'll literally like, make a statistic out of it, right? Like an Excel sheet, and they'll figure it out. That this, wait a second, this level of misfortune is very so highly unlikely that now we're approaching astronomical percentage chances of it ever occurring in my life. You know, 3 or 4 times in a row. And then there are nines, and nines can interface with the astral realm the best. Nines can interface with sort of like spirits, like near departed spirits. They can interface with the realm beyond in almost like a dark or Saturnian way. Like it's a very Saturnian number. And because they can do that, they're a little bit more open to sort of like receiving these types of malefic experiences, malefic energies and stuff like that in their life. Even though for nines, they're not directly opposing the default state, the default matrix state. But even if they're not, they can still perceive it, right? So they can still perceive things like this, as they're happening, or they can still perceive the forces that are sort of like the mechanism behind it. And then for 11s, this usually happens for in an interpersonal sense, right? It always has to do with interfacing with other people and sort of like how that works, and temptations and even sexual perversion. A lot of 11s, if they're not balanced, like they have, they often have leanings towards homosexuality, or they have other people, like men or women, who have leanings towards homosexuality, who will actually show up in their lives and cause some chaos, cause some big chaos, right? And then you have 22, which is on like a meso level, right? On a more like group think, organization, company level almost, that have these sorts of experiences. That's very difficult for them, where they're basically forced to destroy and rebuild, destroy and rebuild, destroy and rebuild constantly, including their own selves, but whatever they build in the external world. And 33s, at least from my experience and from what I know, experience like the full on effects of this, where you literally have hidden but direct and indirect enemies. Like these are players in your life who will literally sabotage your work, will have a deep inlaid hatred for you by default. And usually these people are those who are at a very low state of consciousness, right? And you will be en masse attracting these people, especially when you're young. Let's say from when you're 15 to 25 or something like that. You will quite literally be attracting people who have gone through incredibly traumatic experiences, sexual violence, deviant behavior, alcoholism, drug abuse. You will be attracting these people in your life, right? And they're going to paint a very grim and very dark picture of the world and its realities, its darker realities to you from an early age, right? Um, yeah, even if you don't go out looking or whatever, you will still attract these people. And usually the experiences with these people are very hurtful. They're very traumatic. Um, they have a lot to do with emotional attachments, being created, and then these emotional attachments breaking up. You feeling, used or exploited or somehow even manipulated or emotionally abused. You know, and these elements are constant, right? There are probably some other astrological configurations that also, like from a karmic standpoint, have to go through experiences like this. But as a general rule, the higher the level of consciousness goes, and by level, I mean the potential of awareness. So, how aware you can be of not only the present moment and what you currently see inlaid within the logical laws and reasonings of our world, but beyond the mechanism of logic, right? How much you can see beyond the veil, beyond the three-dimensional, even though you exist in the three-dimensional. How much of the paralogical can you sustain to experience at once, right? That's a big sensory overload. Um, so yeah, this is how these things work and manifest, and on your own spiritual journey, regardless of your life path, as you start advancing more in the world, you will, slowly realize that um, misfortune or bad luck, again, at least from my experience, it doesn't really exist. It's just a way for the numerology to unfold in your life, and shape your experiences and shape your lessons. Um, but for more advanced souls, that very same lesson is the lesson of integrity and almost like resolve, because you have to become fearless and you have to learn how to not expect anything, both good and bad. You have to, like, the only possible form of shelter for the highly advanced soul is the present moment. You understand? This is why the present moment is so talked about, during meditation, Buddhist teachings, all kinds of religious teachings. They tell you about the importance of the present moment, because when you've achieved this degree of spiritual advancement, the only surety, right, is in the full and total acceptance of whatever is occurring right now, right this very second, and finding harmony within the very second you exist, right? Not being in the future, through anxiety and nervousness and expecting the bad, not being in the past through grief and sadness and sorrow and guilt, right? But being inhabiting the present moment, so your awareness, your that bubble of consciousness that we talked about, is full, so you can put out this shine, that keeps these, four-dimensional and two-dimensional beings at bay, right? So they're not attracted to your light like, moths to a flame, right? That type of thing. I think this is a very interesting topic. We could talk about this for a very long time, but this has gone on for too long. Like, let's just end it here. Um, think about this, you guys. Think about how this manifests in your life, and understand that um, you are not going to be able to be at peace and harmonious. It's going to be it's going to be a lot more difficult, right, as you advance. This is why the brain filtration system exists in the first place, because these experiences are very mentally and emotionally taxing. And I know a lot of spiritual gurus and like these spiritualists or wannabe spiritual masters like to think that it's all love and rainbows up there, but it's not. It's a very dark and narrow path, that one must go through, to understand and fully reap the benefits of self control and self mastery and agency. It's not like if everyone loves to think themselves into this state where they're all accepting and they're, all loving and tolerant beyond measure, but your bullshit will be tested. That's a given. And where before you say something like that, before you project an identity onto yourself like that, where you say, well, I accept everything and I have no ego, blah, 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 all those sentiments will be tested. And you're going to be hit where you're the weakest. When you're the weakest and where you're the weakest, right? That's where you're going to be hit. Again, fearlessness, acceptance, these are the tools you have against these malevolent forces, right? These things you shouldn't fear these things, but you should be aware of them. You should know that a lot of the knowledge that is gate kept when it comes to spiritual advancement is gate kept for the safety of the younger soul, right? The non-developed or still developing soul. And this is for a purpose, it's for a reason. And that can be interpreted in both positive ways and negative ways. But it's very important to understand what you're getting yourself into, right? When you talk to someone who, let's say they claim to be sort of like spiritually advanced, like talk to them about these things because they will have some sort of experience like this to back it up. When the irrational, the illogical, the what I call the paralogical has made its introduction, right, to them during their lives, they will have to have these sorts of experiences, right?